Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We will begin in just a few moments as soon as everyone is logged into Zoom. The number of participants is still increasing. Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. Again, welcome everyone to our webinar on immigration policy again tonight, called Restoring Asylum and Dignity for Immigrants, the Work Ahead. As you are getting settled in for this hour-long webinar, I invite you to think about your own experiences with immigration and asylum work. A brief introduction. I am Sister Eilis McCulloh. I serve as the Grassroots Education and Organizing Specialist at Network, and I am thrilled to be joined by my colleague Ronnate and our other panelists tonight. Next, we're just going to do a few quick housekeeping items on Zoom because there have been some updates, so some things have changed. First, if you are in need of captions, on the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says Show Captions. You can go ahead and click on that and select Captions. Next, in a minute, we are going to encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar, and you will do that by using the Q&A option, again at the bottom of your screen. And finally, as we get started tonight, in an effort to build community, I invite all of you to enter into the chat function or the chat box where you are Zooming in from. And if you're comfortable, to share a little bit about what brought you to this webinar tonight. And so as we begin, we have people coming in from the chat now. So we have people from Arizona and Georgia, Erie, Ohio, Milwaukee, Los Angeles, San Francisco. It's going too fast to even keep up. So I think we are spanning the entire country, which is amazing. And I know that together we are going to be a powerhouse to do advocacy on immigration. So as we begin with our overview, tonight we are going to start off with an update about the current asylum policy at the southern border, and also talk about the effect that these policies have on people who are trying to access the asylum process. Then we'll hear from some of our immigration advocates about the conditions they are seeing at the border. We will also hear about how policy impacts people who are living in cities across our country. And finally, we will end with action steps. What can we as faith-filled justice seekers do to restore the right to asylum and make sure that all immigrants are treated with human dignity, the human dignity that they deserve as children of God? Next slide. So tonight, as I mentioned, I am thrilled to welcome my colleague, Ronnate Asirwatham, who serves as Network's Government Relations Director. We are also joined by Pedro de Velasco from Kino Border Initiative, Priscilla Orta from Lawyers for Good Government, and Darlene Gramigna from Bethany House of Hospitality and the Chicago Sanctuary Working Group. And I will now turn this over to Ronnate.
Thank you, Eilis. And we can have the slide on. Yes. Thank you everyone for being here. First of all, as the slide says, I'm really very glad to tell you that the Title 42 expulsion policy has ended. It did not end naturally just because, but it was hard fought, and it was hard fought with every letter you wrote and every protest you marched in. So thank you very much. Next slide, please. Today, I want to reiterate something we all know. Seeking asylum is legal. This is the relevant part of our law, Section 1158A1 of Title 8. Title 8 is the Immigration and Naturalization Act, and that tells you that seeking asylum is legal. And the only requirement is that you have to be physically present in the United States. You cannot apply for asylum from Mexico, Guatemala, or DRC. You have to be physically present here. And the law clearly spells out that it does not matter which way you enter. You have the right to seek asylum regardless of how you enter and whether you enter at a designated port or not. So again, please remember, seeking asylum is a right. Everyone is not entitled to receive asylum, but everyone has the right to seek it. Next slide, please. So while Section 1158 remains the law of this land, on May 12th, 2023, exactly 2 months ago, the Biden administration enacted a rule officially called the Circumvention of Lawful Pathways. We, of course, call it the Biden Asylum Ban. It is officially in place for 2 years, but it can be reviewed and ended at any time. Why do we call it a ban? We call it a ban because it takes away everyone's right to seek asylum at the southern border and affords it only to a few. And this restriction is not based on any humanitarian grounds, but the restriction is based on the manner of entry. As I showed you in the previous slide, under US law, the manner of entry cannot be a penalizing factor for your asylum claim. But this rule makes it so. Under this rule, you can seek asylum only if you have a CBP-1 appointment, that is, if you have an appointment through an app called the CBP-1, and if you are able to prove you fall into one of 5 exceptions. I will get to those exceptions in a minute, but again, you can't use the CBP-1 appointment at any of these ports of entry, but only 8 ports of entry. So therefore, you can see how this is being narrowed. You are allowed to seek asylum in any way at the southern border. But then we are saying, no, you have to go through ports of entry, and then more narrowly, 8 ports of entry. So this is how we are narrowing the access to asylum. And this gets worse, because not only does this rule affect your right to seek asylum, it also affects your claim to asylum. Under the law right now, anyone can seek asylum, and then the asylum seeker has to prove that they have been persecuted on the basis of 5 protected grounds: race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. But under this rule, even if you have the best case, even if you have medical evidence, even if you have a letter from the government threatening you, if you have any of that, and yet if you have not been able to get a CBP-1 appointment, or you are not able to prove these 5 exceptions, you can still be denied your asylum claim, simply on the manner of entry. This is why we are saying that this rule is a ban on asylum. Next slide, please. So these are the 5 exceptions. One, you have to seek asylum in a country that you've traveled through. This is not easy to do, especially in South American countries, Mexico and others. You can't even get medical care sometimes. There's a lot of racism against Black people, as well as people who are LGBTQ+. So it's extremely difficult to seek and also be denied asylum in the country that you travel through. The other exception is if you're a Mexican citizen. This is relatively easy to prove, but I will let my colleagues speaking after me speak about what is really happening on the ground. Second is if you're an unaccompanied minor, that exception is also generally easy to prove. The fact that you could not use CBP1, that, it seems reasonable, written on the screen like this, but actually if you look at the fine print, it is not. You have to also prove that you tried to get someone to help you in Spanish or any of the other languages. And then also, if you come without a CBP appointment, CBP1 appointment, and you're arrested, your phone is taken away from you. So how can you prove this? And it is the same with the exceptional circumstances. It sounds reasonable, but if you look at the fine print, it is not. And there are very few exceptions at all, if possible, for this. To be able to fit into these 5 categories. Next slide, please. And I want to be clear, everything that I'm telling you at this webinar is what the law says and is what generally is the practice. Things are very different at each border post, and the biggest problem is that nothing is uniform or clear. You will hear about that, more about that soon. What is supposed to happen once you have a CBP1 appointment is that you are most likely processed into the country with some paperwork. You are able to follow your asylum cases in other places away from the border. If you do not have a CBP1 appointment, and as I said, you do not fall into those 4 categories, or it's very difficult to prove, what usually ends up happening is that you will be put into CBP custody. You will be detained for some time, and then it is possible that you will be deported. And I will tell you a little more about the CBP1 program that you most likely will be put into if you do not have a CBP1 appointment. Next slide, please. So if you're put into CBP custody, sorry, and this is Customs and Border Protection custody, there's a new policy that you could be put into, especially if you are single, you're traveling, that is if you're traveling as a single person, and you speak Spanish, and most likely at this point, there are more males than females. And what happens is you are kept in CBP custody for your credible fear interview. And your credible fear interview is where the asylum seeker must convince the USCIS officer that he, she, or they has a significant possibility of being persecuted or has been persecuted already. This is a really important step of your asylum case, and usually, especially, if you're going to do it well, you'd have to do a lot of preparation and paperwork. And so having to do it in custody is a barrier to access to justice. But again, this gets worse. This policy was put in place first by Trump and now has been revamped by President Biden. President Biden promised it will be different from Trump in 2 ways. One, that CBP officers won't conduct these interviews, and everyone will have access to a lawyer. And yes, CBP officers do not conduct these interviews. However, they control everything else, including access to the telephone call, and therefore we have heard many reports of people being denied a call to a lawyer. President Biden has not kept his promise that everyone will have a lawyer, because the policy says the asylum seeker in custody has only 24 hours to find a lawyer. And then will have another 24 or so hours to prepare his or her case. And this is not in the policy, but this is in the practice. You have no aid of pens or pencils or papers to be able to prepare your case. And let me be clear, as an asylum case is simply not telling your story to an asylum officer. You need to set the facts of your case to the requirements of the law. And how many of us remember the 5 grounds of persecution that I mentioned 5 minutes ago, unless we have written it down? What is happening to people in CBP custody in this program is really a travesty of justice. I could go on about the horrors, but I will not. I will now pass it back to Eilis.
Thank you so much for Ronnate for this very clear and concise policy update about policies that are so confusing and so rapidly changing. As a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions during this webinar, please put them in the Q&A and we'll answer them at the end. Now, we welcome Pedro de Velasco. Pedro is a Mexican migrant living in the United States with over 14 years of experience working with migrant communities on both sides of the US-Mexico border. He holds a law degree from the Universidad Autónoma de Coahuila and a certificate in US criminal and immigration law from the University of Arizona. He currently serves as the Director of Education and Advocacy with the Kino Border Initiative, which is a Catholic binational organization in ambos Nogales, Nogales, Sonora, and Nogales, Arizona. And its mission is to promote humane, just, and workable migration. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure being here with you tonight or this evening. Basically, I mean, following up on what Ronnate has just clearly explained about the law, yes, May 11 meant the end of Title 42. And I mean, of course, we all celebrated it because, you know, after 3 years, 1 month, and 3 weeks that, you know, Title 42 was in place, of course, it was cause for celebration. But unfortunately, restrictions to access asylum in the US southern border actually became even worse than before. And this has to do with the asylum ban that Ronnate was referring to. So good thing was that, you know, CBP 1 is not the sole way for folks to access asylum at the border. Although, you know, the US government has made it clear that they prefer people to request an appointment through this application before arriving to the border. And I mean this because, I mean, we really were, even like the same day that Title 42 was supposed to end, we weren't sure what CBP was going to do about folks showing up without appointment. So the good thing is that if you're a person fleeing violence and persecution that approaches a port of entry, regardless of if you have or you don't have an appointment, you can be admitted to the United States to begin the asylum process. The problem is that in reality, CBP is prioritizing folks with appointments. Well, they don't call it prioritizing, they say that they are honoring appointments, which basically means that they'll get to the folks without appointments when they get to them. So here's the problem. That weekend after the end of Title 42, that weekend of you know, May 12, 13, and 14, what started happening is that a line of individuals that were struggling with the application, because truth be told, there's not enough appointments under the CBP 1 app to the folks that are waiting in Mexico in order to seek admission to the United States. So these folks are folks that are trying their best with the app to secure an appointment so they can show up. But at the same time, I mean, they're desperate to get to safety. So they're trying to make a line at the port of entry, at the designated port of entry, that is the Deconcini port of entry in Nogales, Sonora. So really fast, this line grow into 100, then 200 people. And immediately the Mexican municipal authorities decided that they needed to place some sort of order at the border. So the idea to prevent people from having to spend day and night waiting in line to be able to approach the CBP officers to request admission to the United States, their solution was to create a list so that people can sign out their names to it. So I don't know, as for you who were following the former restrictions to asylum, but this sounds a lot like metering because it is metering all over again. The US authorities will say that it's not because, I mean, they are not turning people away. They're admitting people as they are able to process them, and it's the Mexican government who is putting order. But the reality is that, I mean, families are sleeping outside there at the port of entry, and right now in Arizona is about 100 and 110 degrees, so it's really hot, and an adult can get really quickly dehydrated because of the heat. Now imagine a young children. So I mean, it's very complicated, and we have gone I mean, we're going every day since the line start to provide food, to provide accompaniment, and to provide orientation. We want to make sure that folks understand that the way that, I mean, although yes, seeking admission to the United States, seeking asylum in the United States is the right, there are additional restrictions they can face if they choose to do this without an appointment. So, I mean, we want to make sure that they are informed so they can make informed decisions about whether or not this is the best choice. But the other problem is that we have also documented several abuses by Mexican authorities when they're not simply administrating the list, but they're overstepping into deciding whose asylum claim is stronger and who should go first in line. Like one time I was speaking with the municipal authorities and I learned that a couple of Russian nationals have shown up that morning, and they decided to have them jump ahead of the line, skipping 300 people that had been sleeping there at the port of entry for days, and have them walk immediately and be processed by CBP that day right there. So, I mean, that's an issue. And the other issue is that people are not fully aware that, signing up their names with the Mexican municipal authorities is not it doesn't mean getting an appointment with CBP1. They cannot tell the difference. A lot of folks, they're unaware about the requirements of getting an appointment through CBP1 app. They're not aware of the consequences of seeking admission without an appointment, about the questions about like whether or not you try to use the app, if you try to seek asylum elsewhere in your journey before arriving to the United States. So they're completely unaware of that. And the other issue is that I kept telling this during Title 42, the number one beneficiary of keeping Title 42 in place was the organized crime, because they got to have the monopoly of who crossed and who didn't. And it wasn't like, well, Title 42 ended, we have a good run, let's go back to, smuggling drugs. No, they find that it was a very profitable business to mislead and misguide migrants into crossing through remote areas. I mean, people that were seeking asylum, and they are continuing to do so. And yes, although Mexican nationals shouldn't be subject to this new asylum ban, we have witnessed Border Patrol misleading migrants into believing that they cannot seek asylum this way because of the asylum ban. Last week, I spoke with Cristina. Cristina is fleeing violence and persecution in Mexico. Organized crime wanted to recruit her husband. So her husband fled, hoping to keep his family safe. However, these people came back and told Cristina, pass this message to your husband. If he doesn't return in 72 hours, we will come for your son, their eldest 11-year-old son. That same day, Cristina and her 3 kids left Guerrero. They crossed to the U.S. Through a gap in the wall to turn themselves to U.S. Border Patrol. Upon being apprehended, she explained her situation to an agent dressed in green uniform and asked for asylum. The agent told her that they didn't give asylum there and that she needed to sign her voluntary return. She tried to explain, to them that she didn't want to sign this, that she wanted asylum. The agent then called on another man that was dressed as a civilian. He showed her her badge and told her basically that she would either sign there or sign inside in detention. But if she didn't sign, she would not be able to request asylum by any means. The family was then expelled to Nogales, and her paperwork said that they were not in danger of returning to Mexico. So this is just an example of how we are seeing that, Border Patrol is misleading, misguiding, misinforming people about asylum, regardless of them being Mexican nationals. So I don't want to go too much over time. Thank you for your attention, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Pedro. And next up, we welcome Priscilla Orta. Priscilla is the supervising attorney for Project Corazon, which is part of the Lawyers for Good Government. She is based in Brownsville, Texas, and regularly crosses over into Reynosa and Matamoras to document human rights abuses, assist humanitarian aid workers, and offer Know Your Rights sessions to migrants waiting in Mexico. Priscilla was just awarded the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute's Distinguished Alumnus Award and looks forward to seeing all DC-based folks at this year's celebration. Welcome. We are so happy to have you with us.
Hello. So please forgive me. It has been a very long day, so I wrote down a lot of what I wanted to say because I only have 7 minutes to say it. But I have 2 pictures here. And the first one, if you look in that back corner, you see a kind of chubby girl with like a lot of blue on with some glasses looking like she's not. That's me. That's me. And these are approximately 100 people waiting for food in Matamoros, Mexico. About 5, you can see the bridge from this spot. It's next door to a really famous restaurant and pharmacy called Garcia's. And these are largely people who I have personally spoken to, whose names and faces I recognize, and who I want to really emphasize their humanity. The pictures I show you, this one and the one with my intern Neha, which will be next, is something I really want to focus on. These are people. These are not just migrants. I'm there. And we have often reduced anyone who's different to something that's other than us, something that isn't us. And quite frankly, we live in a world of cruelty, a world where we are all reduced to our Facebook profile and whatever in the world Instagram threads is. And by the way, if you know, please let me know. I do not understand. But for tonight, I want you to focus on, if no one else, the 2 people you might identify with most. Me, who's speaking with you. And if you go to the next slide, my summer intern, Neha, who I could not be more proud of, she's in the back corner and also blue and not looking nearly as sweaty at 23. So thank God, let me tell you, the heat gets you. Standing in 108 degrees. It is 108 in both these pictures. I think hers might be 113. In this picture, every single woman, every single one has been raped. Every single one. And I often think we hear these stories and we push them away and we otherize them because we think we can't handle the pain. And so what I want you to do is don't focus on the 40 or so women that are in this picture who have experienced weekly rapes by cartel members in Reynosa to prove their power over the bodies of women. But instead, focus on Neha and focus on I, who took down each one of those stories, who sat and cried with each one of these people, and who deeply care about them. And remember that they nor us are simply reduced to an app and an appointment. But I want to focus on one story in particular. Don't run away from this horror. Do what you do and what we do as people of faith in action, and hold the fear and pain that is about to happen, because it will. And know that there are people that survive this and that we must fight with them, because they are remembering who they are and their humanity, and in so doing, reminding us of our own. I think the biggest thing about this app that we have to remember is that it takes a young woman's asylum claim and then completely ignores it. There is not a single question in this app about your fear, about why you're here, about what you ran away from. I met Jennifer when she was 8.5 months pregnant. Jennifer had this really crazy idea, and her idea was that maybe the government could be different and that maybe she should support a different presidential candidate. And for that, she and her family were chased down and beaten both by officials and by larger groups of community members who supported the ruling party. So she fled. She fled through jungles where she was raped and impregnated. And she managed to keep her and her child alive and healthy until she reaches the border. There in Reynosa, she is luckier than most people. There's a fantastic human rights report that came out today that focuses on some of my clients, shared clients. And most of them have absolutely no idea that there's a ban. But Jennifer had a little bit more education than most. She had been willing to talk more than most. She was a pregnant single woman racing through jungles and through cities and through countries so deadly that they're known for killing women, that is one of their strongest statistics. But she makes it by herself. Jennifer is special. At 8.5 months pregnant and being raped daily by cartel members, she very much fears what will happen to her child, much less herself. So she goes and she asks us because she sees us, because we go, because we show up, because we talk, and she tells us and she says, what can I do? At every single port of entry, there's like a secret program. You have to find out through word of mouth, and it's never entirely clear if you'll be taken, and it's never really entirely clear if you'll be helped. But Jennifer was lucky enough, and we were able to forward her to these people, and she was able to get on that bridge with quasi permission, half permission. She sat there for 3 days, being given 1 bottle of water and 1 packet of crackers per day. We begged, we cried, we did everything. We tried to take her food, we tried everything. It is so hot that I break out into hives. It is so hot that people are passing out on the heat on the bridge, and they tell us to our faces that they have been given food and water. After 3 days of begging, Jennifer was let in. And do you know what she said? She immediately asked us how we could turn around and get food to the 12 other people who had been waiting with her. Jennifer did not have an appointment on the app. Technically, she is banned from asylum. She will have to fight her claim in a court, largely by herself, as she has been doing from the beginning. But at no point did she reduce herself to an appointment. And instead, she thought of others. And so I ask all of us today, when we are talking about what actions we can take, that we remember these people and we take the action, because there is absolutely nothing that we have to do that could ever possibly be as terrifying or as grueling or as dehumanizing as what happened to just one of my clients. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla, for sharing with us the story of Jennifer and all the people that you meet each day. And our final panelist is Darlene Gramigna. Darlene is the former executive director of Bethany House of Hospitality, which is a Chicago area shelter for women under 30 and their children who have recently been released from immigration detention. She currently represents Bethany House on the Sanctuary Working Group, which is an interfaith citywide coalition of faith and social service agencies that support recently arrived immigrants. Welcome, Darlene. Oops, you need to unmute.
I want to forewarn you that sirens have been going off here in Chicago. So if you hear more sirens, there may be a tornado before 7 o'clock. So I give you that as my preface to what I'm going to say. Thanks everybody for having us and listen and trying to hear the story of what happens to people when they actually do get across the border. We're part of the network of places that Governor Abbott in Texas and DeSantis in Florida decided that they should ship people to on buses, on planes in any way that they wanted to. And I wanted to be there when some of the first buses came, and they, because I wanted to see who was coming and why they were coming and what people were saying. To date, Chicago has had 11,000 new arrivals. And of course, like New York and Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., has struggled to figure out what is a humane way to welcome folks into our communities. And some of it has been good, and some has not been good. I thought of the same women that Priscilla was talking about, because we were just in a police station where immigrants are being housed right now, and the women were asking for pregnancy tests. So you can surmise what that's about. And an officer in the Chicago area has been charged with getting a 16-year-old pregnant while she was at the police station. So we face the continued, the women and everyone face the continued abuse once they get into the United States as well. I'm sorry to say that it's happened in Chicago, and I'm sure it's happens, people are taken advantage of all along the way, especially in the United States as well. So what I want to say is that in Chicago, I want to talk a little bit about the religious response to new folks are coming, and also the city and state response. Chicago was a sanctuary city declared in 1982 and welcomed Central American refugees with a political focus, focusing on the US foreign policy related to, not just saying people were coming to come, but that there was some foreign policy acts of the United States that they were responding to. And we in Chicago particularly took that focus because we saw that declaring sanctuary meant standing up to US policy, foreign policy, as well as domestic policy. So we have that history. We have history as a sanctuary city. We're a blue state, and we have a generally progressive governor. We just recently got probably the most progressive mayor that we've ever had. And we look forward to working with them and encouraging to do the right things in relation to the new folks that are arriving. We're able to go into twice monthly calls with the city about how folks are being treated, and put on all kinds of situations. We hear about complaints and concerns that people are having, and so we like having the access. I think what we saw when people first came, Catholic Charities and other organizations were planning for 4 days of what people are going to do for 4 days. And you're like, what about after that? Then they were planning for 3 months, and now we're hoping to be part of a team that is planning for people to settle here and to be welcomed here, and to be, join schools and churches and everything else that you need to do to have a full and happy life. Some of my work at Bethany House, we initially were taking women who are only just 18 years old and just out of immigration detention. And when we realized with the Title 42 that women were having to stay in Mexico longer, when women came here, they were 2 years older, they were pregnant often, or they were terrified to walk down the streets of Chicago. One woman walked down the street of Chicago with a staff person and said, "I'm really afraid I'm going to be kidnapped off the street." You can't always promise someone in Chicago that that's not going to happen, but we did try to make people feel like we were there for them and we could protect them in some ways. But that's the kind of fears that Priscilla is talking about, that folks carry on to Chicago, to New York, to Philadelphia, to everywhere else they're going. And that, when I asked people when they first got off buses, like, why did you come here? They said, oh, we were told we were going to New York. And I said, do you have anyone in New York, or do you know where you're going? No, we just, we just figured New York was okay, because they know no other place in the United States. And so, I thought if people have family there or they want to go there, that's great. And then people seem just as happy to settle in Chicago as well. So, there's a whole, so that's kind of a little bit of what the city's response has been to welcoming people. And also we want to say the religious community's response. So I'm also, as part of Bethany House of Hospitality, we also participate in a group called the Sanctuary Working Group. And this group started in 2020 when people used to be able to visit the detention centers. They were not allowed to visit because of COVID. And we were trying to think of like, what kind of things can we say and do and be a part of that, that brought up more support for folks. We started as a small group, and then we've grown to a group of 35 social service agencies and religious communities, and all supporting immigrants. We meet weekly at a Zoom call, and we share resources. Someone can be a case manager, someone can be can provide legal services, someone else can, we have a small fund that we can use for emergency things. And people bring all kinds of individuals and cases to us, but we also bring a shared response, like how do we support these folks, or how do we support those folks? And it's a great community effort to bring some of the issues that are both the issues that are affecting people, but also the, how do we just support people in general? How do we reunite people? How do we deal with a family that comes as a family of 5 and then adds another 8 family members have shown up? And how do we deal with a family of 13? And how do we find some kind of physical space for them to live in? We are trying to work closely with the city about finding long-term housing. We received some funding from some of the citywide foundations to start a 3rd house of hospitality. So we have Bethany House, which is for women. We have Viator House, which is for men, young men. And then we've started this 3rd one, which we hope is going to be for families, because we haven't found that many places for temporary housing for families. So we have a couple of different places. Again, we, like the city, are looking for bigger places and immigrant-friendly landlords that people can move on to and find a decent life here. Trying to think of what else I was going to say. So I think the main thing that we're working on is just trying to build community, invite people into our community. I know I went into a police station with one of the community leaders, a woman named Reverend Dr. Beth Brown, who had decided that we should offer radical hospitality. And because Chicago has had the unusual and bad concept of putting folks that don't fit in shelters and police stations, she said we should offer radical hospitality, and all churches, congregations, mosques, synagogues welcome people into that. So she said, well, I should invite someone into my church. And so I went with her to mostly transit. And she also is on the police accountability board. And she said, I know what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have a list of all the people here. And I want to know, who's been here the longest. And a little girl raised her hand and said, we've been here the longest. She raised her hand and said, we've been here the longest. We are, we've been here for a month on the floor. So it was a 9-year-old, an 11-year-old, and parents sleeping on the floor of a police station for a month in Chicago. Not much of a welcome to this thing. And so that family came back to the church with us that night so that they could be offered the radical hospitality of one Presbyterian church in Chicago. And we're trying to build that network so that we have a community of places and people that can support folks, and trying to find spaces that will do it along with the city while encouraging them, and also them offering resources to us. Again, what we all see lacking in the United States is not just city support or state support, but federal support. Where is the federal support that, folks have come here and we are trying to support them. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Darlene, and for making it through amidst the sirens going off in the background. I will now turn it over to Ronnate for a very quick wrap up.
Thank you. Thank you, Pedro, Priscilla, and Darlene. I hope after hearing all of this, everyone on the webinar, you are convinced that this is an asylum ban and it is not in any way orderly or safe, especially if you're an asylum seeker. And again, let me be clear that while we are clearly happy that Title 42 is over, that some people who are able to come into the US through the CBP1 app or through exceptions, we know that that is not enough. There are also lots of good people in government who say today, we are adding more languages to the CBP1 app, we are increasing the number of telephones, and yes, we'll give asylum seekers a pen, a paper, maybe sometimes. But all of this is good, but clearly tinkering around with the little things do not solve the problem, because there are fatal flaws in the policy itself that exacerbate the systemic problems in our immigration system. And let us pause and think for one moment what these policies are doing to us. Right now, we are being deprived of the ability to welcome and invest in our communities because of these policies. You saw the joy that Darlene had when she spoke and she was saying she was able to welcome so many despite the hardships and despite the problems. Right now, the shelter and services programs that support asylum seekers and invests in communities is being gutted. It is the only program that supports asylum seekers with funding from the federal government, and it is being gutted. And we don't even know if it will be around in the next fiscal year. Gutting this program will ensure that we, people who don't live close to the border, that we do not get to know asylum seekers as human beings. That we don't get to know that there's no difference between an Afghan man who has served the US and come through a special program and an Afghan man who has served the US and is now at our southern border. Yes, there are several. And for politicians who fear so much, they fear that they won't win the next election. They fear attack ads. They fear so much. For them, making sure that you and I have no contact with asylum seekers as human is good. Because then it is easy for the politicians to sell asylum seekers as people to be feared, criminals who are intrinsically illegal and therefore must be detained, surveilled, and prevented by entering through a militarized force. Ignorance breeds fear, and that fear is what is propelling policies that we now see in our midst, policies like this asylum ban. All of us who call the United States home, we cannot, we must not allow fear to usurp our humanity. And therefore, I hope you will join us all in pushing for just, humane, and equitable policies. Over to you, Eilis, and you can tell us what we can do.
Thanks, Ronnate. Now, I'm sure if you're like me and you just listen to all of our wonderful panelists, you're like, what can I do right now to be part of the fixing of the asylum system? So first, we have an all-Catholic sign-on letter that will be delivered to Congress. And so that letter will urge Congress to invest in communities. And we are asking that you sign this letter, that you share it with all of your friends, your family, your communities, anyone you know to sign on, so that Congress hears from us and they know that this is an issue that we are passionate about and that we care about deeply. Second, we are asking everyone, and I mean everyone, to email your member of Congress and urge them to invest in their communities. We know that there is great power in numbers. There were almost 1,000 of you who registered for this webinar. So can you imagine the movement we can create if all of you, plus your friends and family, or anyone else you know, sign on to the letter and or email your member of Congress. At Network, we believe that together we can get Congress to invest in communities and divest from militarization at the border. And so next, we are going to have a really quick Q&A that people have been submitting questions throughout. So we're unfortunately probably not going to have time to get through all of the questions tonight, but we'll make sure to reach out to you as we can. So the first one, I think Priscilla is going to answer it. And it is from John. And John said that he has never understood that since seeking asylum is legal and in conformance with US and international law, how can any administration get away with restricting entry from other countries and restricting ports? So Priscilla.
The really short answer I want to share is that because we let them. It's because we let them. The reason that there's kids in Chicago who don't, by the way, I lived in Chicago for 3 years, love it. The reason there's kids in Chicago who don't have food tonight is because we let it happen. And it isn't because we individually choose. In fact, it's because we are too afraid to show up communally, either in Zoom or in person, to make it stop. Truly, the only reason the administration is getting away with this is because good people are not standing up yet, and we're figuring it out. This isn't an admonishment. Rather, it's a call to action to say, you're right. So what are we going to do? We're going to write to them, but that isn't going to be enough. So let's go together. Let's do lobby days. Let's learn to talk to each other. Let's do the simple act of smiling at people in the stores when we hear a different language, because that alone starts a movement where people can feel safe and welcome. And suddenly when somebody says to you or mentions in passing, oh, those immigrants doing, you say, well, no, not here. So truly what I say is the reason that people do anything in politics is because they can get away with it. Legality in our system, unfortunately, as we see at the Supreme Court at the highest levels, that has been lost. And we've got to fight to take it back. And thankfully, hopefully, we have a really big crowd of people who can join us in that fight.
Priscilla, when you were talking earlier, I think it was you mentioned that there was a report that came out today.
Yes. Human Rights First just published today, right now, a report on the stories all across the border. Several of them mention Lawyers for Good Government, who I work with, but it's literally stories across the border. Christina, I know her personally, a wonderful person, spent weeks just talking to people. So I can drop a link and we can share it out. Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so our next question is for Ronnate. And it is, what is the policy that's in effect that's not at our southern border, so in the northern border around Canada?
So the policy on our northern border in Canada is very different because, well, officially, Canada is the one country that the US has a safe third country agreement with. And that is the one reason that, there's one. So what that means is that if you go to Canada and you have to ask for asylum there first. But however, the issue was happening is that when people in the US, mainly people, asylum seekers who find it so bad, and even other immigrants who find it so bad in the US, in the last couple of months before May 11th, they actually were crossing the border into Canada. And Canada was like, oh, there's so many people coming over. We have to find something to do. So the actual problem was that, our cruelty was sending people into Canada, and that is why now they have, changed the program, and the US is agreeing to send people to Canada, but there is no block. There is the sense that you can't seek asylum if you go to Canada first, but clearly, if you come from Canada, it's easier for Canadian citizens to come through than it is for a Mexican citizen. In general, also, if you fly into the US, either through the parole program, or if you simply have a different type of visa and fly, and then you claim asylum, which is affirmative asylum, then you don't have to go through the CBP1 process. So that is, again, it tells you what the difference is. If you fly, you have money, you have a passport.
Okay. And earlier, Ronnate, you mentioned a program that was being gutted.
Yes.
Can you remind us what that is?
So that is the Shelter and Services Program. So that is a program which was officially started as the Shelter and Services Program. It officially started in January, but it is a program for funds that it is appropriated. It comes through Congress for funds to organizations such as organizations at the border, for shelter and services, and then also organizations such as Darlene's in any of the other cities. This is what it gives funds to. This is the program, and that was just started. It is vital for asylum seekers because as soon as they come, or if they travel on, that's the only way they can, have funds for shelters. And that is the program that we're asking in both the letter and in the action that Congress keeps, and Congress fully funds as they did last year. So that is our big ask on that. And I think there's another question that I'll quickly answer, what can be done. And, some things can be done. So this program, which funded this through appropriations, was, it did happen last year. It was passed last year. So clearly some things can be done, and that is why we're focusing on that. And also, this asylum ban policy is not on Congress, it is on the president. And again, that, pressure and action does work for those as well. So.
Great. Thank you, Ronnate. And I know that we have many more questions that people have submitted, but unfortunately, we are out of time tonight. I think we could all continue talking for at least another hour. But if you have questions that you would or would like to talk to us, please feel free to email us at info@networklobby.org, and we will get back to you with any questions. You can also reach us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. And as a reminder, oh, go ahead.
I would say, especially the people asking questions about work permits, please email them, because I have an answer. I have a really good answer for you. And also, if you live far from the border, I have really good answers for you. So please do email them so we can get in contact.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Priscilla. So tonight, all of you will receive a recording of this webinar as well as the slides. And when you log off, you'll notice a little pop-up to sign our sign-on letter. On behalf of Network, I would like to extend our extreme gratitude to our three panelists. You all were amazing and informative. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you to all of you for joining us in this work on immigration. We hope you have a great night.